Hi, this is your host Sapil Bhartiya and welcome to State of Energy. We are here at John Hopkins University in Washington DC, and today we have with us once again McGee Young, CEO of WattCarbon. McGee, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's my pleasure to host you again and to see and meet you in person. Let's quickly remind our viewers what is WattCarbon all about, why you created this organization.
So, WattCarbon is building an environmental commodities market for distributed clean energy. And what we mean by that is we're unlocking the environmental potential of distributed energy resources that are part of an overall effort to decarbonize our energy systems. We found that 40% of emissions come from buildings. Decarbonizing buildings is probably our fastest pathway to achieving our net zero goals. But right now, that work doesn't get credit for the environmental benefits that it delivers. And part of that is that we just don't have the data infrastructure we need. We don't have the market infrastructure to support procuring clean energy from distributed resources. And we also need better capital resources. We need to invest in these resources. And so that's what WattCarbon is working on.
What is WattCarbon's association with LF Energy?
So we're a member of LF Energy. I'm on the board of directors of LF Energy. So it's been something that I've been working on for a long time, going back to my last company. We feel it's really important as we develop these markets that they're done so in an open and transparent way. And most of our technology is built on open source data, open source resources, to make sure that there's a level playing field for everybody.
When we look at energy sector, or when we look at LF Energy, the initiative came from RT Eleander, but the problem that we're looking at, the climate crisis, is global. It's not a regional problem. What kind of collaboration are you seeing across the pond? US. Do you see the challenges in Europe are different than here, or you feel it's similar and the collaboration is going to help both parties?
One of the things that we're working on is an organization called the Open EAC Alliance. And the Open EAC Alliance is an international group. We're working with folks in Europe to create a set of resources for establishing methodologies that can calculate more precisely the impact of investments into distributed energy resources. Think about energy efficiency. We all know that energy efficiency matters, but being able to turn that into a quantifiable, transactable certificate requires a lot of input from stakeholders. And those challenges are no different in Europe than they are in the United States or anywhere else in the world. And so I think actually international collaboration is a critical piece of what we're trying to work on.
Earlier, you were talking about distributed energy resources. How would you define distributed energy resources?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a vague term. If we think about, kind of the old grid was defined by kind of one-way power generation. The utility would have a bunch of power plants, and they'd turn those power plants up and down based on demand. So supply would follow demand. But now that we're building renewables at scale, wind and solar, demand in many cases needs to follow supply. We need to use more energy when the grid's clean and less energy when renewables are unavailable. So distributed energy resources are inclusive of things like batteries, demand response, EV charging. We also throw in heat pumps and other kind of either miniature power plants in a lot of respects that are owned and operated by customers, by end users, but who nonetheless are an important part of our strategy for utilizing as much of our renewable capacity as possible. So we think as the grid is evolving into this kind of more two-way structure, distributed energy resources become part and parcel of our overall mechanism for managing our energy use.
Can you talk about some of the use cases that are there?
Yeah, so I think we think there's basically three kind of value propositions around distributed energy. Number one is that it's cheaper. It helps save money on people's bills, and as we know, this is an important part of how we think about our energy use, is that it's costly. And to the extent that we can provide our community members with ways of reducing their bills, of generating their own electricity, of investing in their own resiliency, that goes a long way to attracting adoption of DERs. Secondly, obviously, there's grid benefits. So the utilities, to the extent that they can unlock the power of DERs, can use them effectively to balance supply and demand. But I think for us, the most important is the environmental impact. At the end of the day, we've got an ecological crisis unfolding before us, and we need to massively increase the pace at which we decarbonize our energy systems. And so to the extent that we're delivering clean energy through DERs, it has a tremendous impact on our ability to fight climate change.
As you were earlier saying that the the way grid used to work has also changed. It's no longer one-way traffic. We have solar at home. At the same time, a lot of folks are getting EVs, which also means we are consuming more. I mean, during summertime or winter time, last year because of the war going on in Europe, there was a big crisis, and now everybody's plugging their EVs also at home to charge. Right. What kind of strain and stress is going to create on the grid? And do you feel that we are ready? I don't think we are ready, but what kind of efforts that are going on? And we can just have a myopic view and just look at the LF energy landscape here. We are using, these are the efforts that are going on to deal with the challenge.
Yeah, I think it's oftentimes where we don't have the data we need to be able to make smart decisions about things like EV, when do we charge our EVs? And the price signals that we get today are oftentimes not actually very aligned with when renewables are online. For example, just where I live in California, we have an overabundance of solar in the middle of the day. My utility encourages me to charge my car with lower rates at night, when most of the grid is being powered by fossil fuels still. And so we need to think about how to create data infrastructure that allows us to make smarter decisions that are aligned with decarbonization principles. And that challenge exists both at the utility level, but also amongst those of us who are in the ecosystem to develop the types of tools that can be accessed by both sort of traditional incumbents as well as the new entrants into the market.
Can you talk about what kind of technologies, resources are available so that organizations, people can participate in this clean energy?
Yeah, so typically you would have markets of one sort, environmental commodities markets. In the world of energy, that's typically REC markets, renewable energy credits, or in Europe, they're guarantees of origin. But this is a certificate that that you can own, that says you own the sort of rights to 1 megawatt hour of clean energy generation that you can apply against your own consumption to kind of prove your net zero status. In other environmental commodity markets, might be more carbon, like a carbon market, where you buy essentially a ton of carbon removal or carbon sequestration to apply against your own emissions. What we found in working with distributed energy is that neither of those markets actually really work for distributed energy. It's too complicated for a carbon market, and the traditional sort of renewable energy markets were focused on generation at the megawatt hour. So when you're looking at demand response or energy efficiency, it's two ways. It's a lot smaller granularity, and really the hour of the day and the location matters just as much as the overall production. So as we've been working on this, we actually realized that we needed to build a system of record that would allow distributed energy to compete and participate the same way that you have environmental markets for carbon offsets or for renewable energy credits, but it needed to be specific to the value that distributed energy could bring to the grid. So it had to be hourly. It had to be granular in terms of the energy use. And frankly, there's some other interesting components. We say every watt hour tells a story, and when we think about distributed energy, that's coming from communities. That's an investment that we're making into putting solar panels on schools, or putting batteries in homes so that there's resilience in the face of maybe grid outages. And as we think about how to procure clean energy, we're also now thinking about, is that an investment that we're also making in our communities, and what are the attributes of that investment? So can we think about this beyond just the megawatt hour?
Can you also talk about how people can participate in REACH program?
Yeah, so our registry that we call the WattCarbon Energy Attribute Tracking System, WEATS, is designed to be a system of record for distributed energy resources, so they can make claims around the environmental impacts that they're making, and then turn those into exchangeable certificates. And so what we've done is create a pathway for any distributed energy resource developer, think about rooftop solar or batteries or heat pumps, to register their projects in WEATS and then automatically generate the energy attribute certificates, the EACs, that allow them to transact those with counterparties, with buyers of those EACs who help fund and finance the projects that are going into the ground.
By participating through these, does it kind of lead to distributed clean energy? And if yes, what kind of adoption you're seeing? What kind of use cases are there?
One of the really great use cases that we found is for batteries. This is a good way to kind of imagine the power, the potential here. If you charge a battery with solar power in the middle of the day and then discharge it in the evening when the grid's dirty and when the grid is otherwise doesn't have a lot of renewables on it, you're effectively time shifting that clean energy from when we have too much of it to when we don't have enough of it. And what WEATS does is it allows the certificates, the hourly certificates, to be generated that prove that you charged that battery when the grid was clean, went off of solar power, and that you discharge that battery when the grid was dirty and you're displacing fossil fuel. The same sort of concept holds for a heat pump, where you're replacing a gas furnace with electricity, and now you're able to demonstrate the environmental impact of that new electrical system that you've installed vis-a-vis the old fossil fuel system that you replaced it with. Or EV charging, you're charging your car when the grid's clean and not when the grid's dirty. So all of these require some evidence, and that comes from the data that is available from these projects, right? So you have an inverter on your solar panels or in your battery, you have your car charger has data associated with it. And so we can prove in a way that's almost incontrovertible, right? This is coming from systems of, existing systems of record, and now we're taking that one step further and turning that into an environmental commodity.
Earlier, talking about EACs. EACs are used either by individuals, or corporates can also use it for the net zero goals.
EAC is the term that the GHG protocols used 10 years ago when they first started to define how you mitigate Scope 2 emissions. Scope 2 emissions are related to your energy use from the grid. And because we call renewable energy credits RECs in the United States and GEOs in Europe, the GHG protocols needed a term that could be adopted universally. So they used the term energy attribute certificate to reflect any certificate that reflected an exchange of energy between two parties that was clean. More recently, the Department of Energy issued in the United States issued guidelines for tax credit, specifically around green hydrogen, where they were requiring deliverability within the same grid, hourly time matching, and incrementality, meaning that the energy that you were procuring that was clean had to be from a facility that was relatively new. And the Department of Energy said that you needed to acquire the energy attribute certificate, or the EAC, that corresponded to that particular unit of energy that you were using to match to your own load. And so the EAC has taken on sort of the term of art for the kind of more granular hourly certificate that is reflective of a little bit more of a sophisticated understanding of clean energy. But fundamentally, it's like the same thing as what we'd always called a REC or a GEO before. It's just a little bit more inclusive now. The attributes can be any number of attributes that we track, and not just a single one, which is that this is a megawatt hour of clean energy.
When we looked at DERs, what kind of challenges do you see are there in terms of adoption? Are you happy with adoption, or you're like, no, a lot of work has to be done? What kind of work has to be done?
I mean, we're seeing in some places adoption is happening, but generally it's happening too slow. We're kind of on a pathway right now of meeting our net zero goals in the built environment in about 300 years, and at the cost of about $100 trillion. We have about 30 years, and we can probably spend $10 trillion. So we've got to get a 90% improvement on both fronts. The biggest barrier right now is the cost of capital. So if you want to go put solar panels on your roof or buy a battery or invest in energy efficiency upgrades, there's a high upfront cost for that. So you have to borrow money to pay for it. And it'll typically return, you'll earn your money back over time. But unless you're really well capitalized, rich, those finance costs actually double the cost of the project. So for the same solar panels, a rich person who can pay cash pays half as much as a middle-class person who has to put it on credit, and a poor person pays 3 times as much. And so that makes, the energy transition like sort of, it's hard to access for a lot of folks. And generally just way too expensive. And so what we've done is we've built a way for finance to start to underwrite, so corporations who are trying to reach their net zero goals to underwrite the cost of distributed energy the same way that they might sign a PPA or a VPPA for large-scale wind or solar projects. Now they can do that for distributed energy as well. So they can help actually reduce the costs for end customers and claim the environmental credits that they need to get to net zero, so that we can accelerate the pace of DER, so we can cut down that 300-year time frame that we need. We can get rid of that $100 trillion and turn that into something that's a little bit more manageable for all of us.
So when we look at EACs, who are the stakeholders, who are the constituents, like individuals, organizations, or the folks who are developing these systems?
Yeah, so it's a complicated ecosystem, right? Because you have the end customer who's really looking for lower bills, a warmer house, that sort of thing, and a utility that's looking for grid benefits. But the EACs are valuable mostly to those with net zero goals, like corporations. And so the way it would typically work is that a project developer, say like a solar, somebody who puts a lot of solar panels on roofs or puts in heat pumps or batteries, will work with us to connect to WEATs so that they can track the environmental impacts of their projects. And then those certificates that get generated from that can be sold. And they would typically sell those to corporates that have net zero goals. And what that allows the project developer to do is to go back to their customers with a better offer, right? A lower cost to their project, because they know that they have a secondary cash flow coming in from the sale of the environmental attributes associated with the project. When there's financing involved, now that's a lower interest rate for the customer. Where it's a straight up sale of the EACs, it's a discount on the cost of the project in the first place. So what we've done is created a marketplace where any company that's developing distributed clean energy can create their EACs and then put them up for sale for any other net zero buyer to come and make that part of their net zero energy solution.
If you look at WattCarbon, what are the things that you folks are working on?
I think we've got three sort of really important priorities for us as a company. One is that there's just not enough data infrastructure to allow distributed energy resources to scale. So it's really important for us that not only for our own systems of record, but also for the ecosystem, that we have more visibility, more transparency, the ability to forecast what savings might be, what the emissions impacts might be. Second is to make the marketplace infrastructure more robust, so that we think of this kind of like Airbnb for renewables, that if you're, or for distributed energy, right? So if you have every single company that's out there doing this really amazing work, it's oftentimes done without a lot of visibility, right? We don't know the stories of those companies that are on the front lines, doing the hard work of getting homes retrofit and putting on solar panels. So how do we tell the stories of those companies a little bit better? And then finally, again, addressing that finance gap, making sure that we're not charging 3 times as much for the same resource just because somebody doesn't have a good credit score, or just because somebody doesn't live in a nice neighborhood. So to the extent that we can empower are the corporate net zero buyer to help underwrite the costs of these projects in their communities, we can see a double bottom line impact.
McGee, thank you so much for taking time out today, and of course talk about what carbon, the larger, the challenges the ecosystem is facing, and how you folks are trying to help them. Thank you so much for great insights, and I'd love to chat with you again. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.